shoved my wife down those steps, look me in the eye and say it," Chad's smirk snapped. "Prove it." I slammed the phone on the hood. Rebecca's video played on full volume. Chad's hand on Sarah's arm, her fall, the bruise blooming. "You call that a vote?" I said. "I call it assault. I already mailed the preservation letter. The sheriff's on the way. Enjoy your last clipboard, Karen, because tonight you get cuffs or contempt." Step 1. Evidence. And more evidence. I photographed Sarah's trellis, the scraped steps, the bruises, the violation notices, and the HOA-branded SUV with the same license plate that appeared on 3 separate neighbor complaints. I pulled old minutes from HOA meetings, cross-referenced contractor invoices with bank records where possible, and asked Rebecca to forward the raw video. The trick is to make the chaotic, tidy timestamp everything, label the files, back them up in 3 places. I also quietly interviewed neighbors who'd had run-ins with Karen and Chad, a teacher forced out after endless fines, an elderly couple threatened with liens, a landscaper who'd been pressured to inflate invoices. Each story was a thread. Pulled together, they formed a noose of pattern and intent rather than isolated incidents. Next, I built a legal foundation. I'm not a lawyer, but I know how to follow paper trails. I retained a local attorney who'd handled public corruption cases. She smiled when she saw my folder and said, "You've got more than a story, you've got a pattern." We sent a preservation letter to the HOA demanding records and notifying them that all relevant documents, invoices, and communications must be preserved for potential litigation. That simple legal scrawl freezes a lot of dirty laundry in place. It prevents destruction and forces answers. Simultaneously, I filed a formal complaint with the county sheriff about trespass and assault and asked for an internal affairs review of Officer Benson's conduct. Public agencies hate appearances of impropriety. A formal complaint gets them moving. While the lawyers drafted, I went public with care. There's a science to turning community anger into protective pressure rather than rabble. I organized a discreet meeting at my garage. Nothing flashy, just coffee and chairs, and invited neighbors who'd been unfairly targeted. We shared stories, documented dates, and together confirmed overlap. The same inspector, the same vague citations, the same contractor being recommended repeatedly. Then I arranged for an investigative reporter I trusted to review our packet. Press attention forces institutions to act faster than any personal gripe ever will. When the local paper ran a piece about bullying behind the bylaws, it changed the neighborhood's mood from frightened to furious. The county prosecutor took notice next. With the reporter's quotes and our compiled evidence, they opened an inquiry into potential fraud, coercion, and misuse of HOA authority. The attorney I hired moved on breach of duty claims, and the sheriff served subpoenas for internal emails and bank records tied to the HOA. People who once pretended not to notice now became sources. A board member's spouse admitting in a recorded call that we used fines to flatten houses we wanted. A contractor confessing to falsified invoices. The prosecutor's office is patient but can be relentless. Their investigators started knocking on doors, and that sound echoed through Karen's fortress of silence like an avalanche. Public exposure shifted power. Karen, who'd used privilege as armor, found herself answering direct questions on the record. Board members who'd been her puppets ducked calls and suddenly remembered meetings they'd never attended. Chad's veneer of authority cracked when his alleged training certifications were shown to be online certificates anyone could buy for $30. The officer who'd waved us off found his internal complaints reopened. Importantly, the neighbors' fear turned into civic action. We petitioned for an independent audit of HOA finances, demanded transparent election procedures, and collected signatures for recall efforts. When enough signatures went to the county clerk, the recall petition became unstoppable. At the civil level, we filed a lawsuit for assault, emotional distress, and unlawful entry. The initial motion sought a temporary restraining order to prevent HOA personnel from coming within 25 feet of our property, and the judge granted it. That court order became a shield. Chad and his cronies could no longer harass us without contempt of court consequences. The legal filings also disclosed a web of shell entities tied to Karen's real estate ventures, revealing a motive. She'd been harvesting fines and using fear to push sales to buyers connected to her circle. Once motive, means, and opportunity were visible in legal documents, the narrative moved from neighbor dispute to a prosecutable pattern. That's when the dominoes fell faster. The county froze, HOA accounts pending audit. 2 board members resigned under public pressure. 1 sought immunity and turned state's witness, providing recordings that described coordinated efforts to encourage turnover. Chad was suspended and later charged with misdemeanor assault once the prosecutor reviewed Sarah's hospital records and Rebecca's footage. Officer Benson faced internal disciplinary measures for failing to act impartially. The court awarded us a temporary damages package covering Sarah's medical bills and an injunction mandating structural reforms in Pine Creek's governance, independent auditors, term limits, and transparent vote counts. Victory wasn't total, but it was surgical and effective. Recovery is slower than victory. We used the damages to repair the trellis, better wood, reinforce joints, and to fund a neighborhood legal clinic where residents could consult about HOA notices without fear. We held public forums with the new interim board and the county liaison, teaching neighbors how to request records and file complaints. Sarah founded a small clinic delivering herbal therapy to hospice patients, and I returned to leading neighborhood self-defense classes, this time with an informed legal backdrop. Power needs checking, and communities rebuild when they turn fear into civic knowledge. If you're watching this because you're sick of petty tyrants cloaked in authority, remember the tactical blueprint. Document everything, get witnesses, involve law enforcement and prosecutors through formal channels, and use the press strategically to shift the social landscape. It isn't pretty, and it takes patience, but it works. Drop a comment below with where you'd start. Do you document, lawyer up, or gather your neighbors first? Share your story. Bullying thrives in silence. Community heals through exposure, law, and persistence. We didn't break people to win. We used what we knew, stayed 2 steps ahead, and reclaimed what mattered: our safety, our dignity, and our front porch. "Call off your goons, Karen," I said into the phone, voice flat. "Or the next person knocking on your door won't be me, it'll be a state auditor." Click. No threats, just a promise backed by paper. That's how we open. Folks, no slow build, no gentle prelude. When a bully learns your soft spots, you don't shout, you switch angles. In SEAL training, we were taught the worst enemy isn't the strongest, it's the one who knows your vulnerabilities. Karen's HOA knew everyone's: fines, liens, shame. Ours would be leverage. As Sarah slept with her arm taped to a sling and a pain plan in place, I sat in Mike's office surrounded by receipts, bylaws, and faces on a whiteboard. This wasn't a feud anymore. It was an operation. And operations have phases, clocks, and clean exits. Mike slid over a fat manila folder like it was contraband. Years of complaints, meeting minutes that didn't meet, bank statements with highlight stripes like caution tape. Benson rushed Karen's husband's death report. Doug left First National under a cloud. Chad's record sealed right before he started inspections. I didn't smile. I started sorting. Rebecca, his wife and a reporter, agreed to dig quietly on the HOA accounts, and Karen's sudden taste for leather seats and imported handbags. "I've wanted this story for years," she said, "but people are scared of their mortgage being weaponized." I get it. Fear is predictable, and predictable is exploitable. Authoritarians run on silence. Our countermeasure would be sunlight, slow, steady, documented. I phoned Sam Wilson at dusk. Former ranger, now a lawyer, alive because Sarah once stitched him back from the edge after a crash. He waved away my offer to pay. She saved me. I'm in. We tore through state HOA statutes, disclosure rules, and case law until the citations blurred. They've tripped at least 6, Sam said, tapping a page. Selective enforcement, improper executive sessions, denial of records. He shrugged. They rely on residents running out of money before the truth runs out of runway. I remembered the team's mantra: if the front door's wired, you don't whine, you find a window. So we mapped windows, public records requests, open meeting recordings, conflicts of interest, safety complaints routed to the state, and a parallel ethics memo to City Council about Benson's cozy calls. Phase 1 was footprinting. I walked the neighborhood at golden hour like any neighbor with a camera, only my lens had a checklist. Karen's unapproved gazebo, photographed with date stamps, Doug's oversized shed, measured against published limits. Chad's inspections, caught peering through windows, logged with doorbell clips. 12 requests for financials went out certified, mail the same morning, dues, ledgers, vendor contracts, bank reconciliations, executive session minutes. Then I attended every open meeting with a pocket recorder and a smile. When they tried to shut down questions as disruptive, I quoted the statute and asked it again slower. Calm isn't weakness. Calm is bait. Sarah hated sitting still. Even hurt, she mapped social lines who Karen had humiliated, who'd paid expedite fees, who'd been warned about attitude. Our dining table turned war room. String lines from Karen to Doug to Chad to Benson to a contractor who somehow always won bids. Mike ringed our house with cameras, and sure enough, Chad showed up at odd hours, clipboard in hand, breath fogging my windows. "You're not going to engage, are you?" Sarah asked, eyes searching mine. I adjusted her sling and kissed her temple. "No hard contact. They want to shove on camera. We'll give them paperwork instead, dense enough to bury a tank." Phase 2 was pressure. Rebecca's quiet reporting turned up consulting checks to a Shell LLC sharing a mail drop with Doug's cousin. Sam drafted a preservation of evidence notice that froze shredders and inboxes. We filed a complaint with the state AG's consumer unit for deceptive practices, attached 20 exhibits, and CC'd the HOA's insurance carrier because insurers hate surprises more than I hate sloppy welds. I sent a safety notice to the fire marshal about the gazebo that violated setbacks, not spite, strategy. When rot lives everywhere, you don't need to kick. You knock gently and let gravity handle the rest. The board responded with bluster. Fraudulent requests, harassment. A letter threatened immediate fines if I didn't withdraw my questions. That one went in Exhibit G, right behind the statute that says records must be produced within 5 business days. I posted one sentence to the neighborhood forum. "If you've paid a special assessment, keep your receipts." My inbox turned into a confession booth. People attached Venmo, screenshots, emails with "pay by Friday" or "lien," and stories of crying at kitchen tables. I anonymized, organized, and kept names off anything until they were ready. Fear loosens when it sees a path with handrails. Phase 3 was timing. We set a deadline for record production, then scheduled a neighborhood coffee and code on my driveway the next morning. A plain English talk on rights with Sam answering questions and Rebecca listening more than speaking. "We're not here to torch," I said. "We're here to measure." We handed out a one-page checklist. Ask for documents, log interactions, film from your property line, never block a public way, and never, ever lose your temper on camera. Half the power of a bully is the viral clip they're praying you give them. I wanted ours to be the clip of a calm group reading a statute out loud. They blinked first. The HOA dumped a partial packet at Sam's office redactions like blackout poetry. It was enough. The vendor list tied back to that Shell LLC. The bank reconciliation rounded suspiciously. Executive minutes recorded votes that residents swore never happened. We drafted an injunction and a complaint, but we didn't file them yet. Instead, I sent a courteous email. "We're noticing material errors. We'd prefer correction over litigation. You have 5 days." It wasn't mercy, it was tactics. When someone hangs themselves, you don't grab the rope, you move the chair 6 inches farther away and step back. On day 4, Benson's cruiser rolled slow past our curb and stopped. He stared at our cameras. The cameras blinked back. I walked out with both hands visible and a smile. "Afternoon, officer. Want the statute links on audio recording at public meetings?" He said nothing, then drove on. That night, Chad taped a final notice to our door citing a code section that didn't exist. I peeled it off, scanned it, and emailed it to the city attorney with a subject line, "Counterfeit citations create liability." The reply was one line, "Please call me in the morning." If you're keeping score at home, that was the pivot. Not a shout. A calendar invite. Here's where I talk to you, the listener in a small town with a big bully. You don't need a SEAL trident to win this. You need a good pen, steady breath, and teammates who keep promises. Build your case like a wall, block by block, straight and level, no gaps to slip a lie through. Film without taunting. Ask for documents without swearing. Post facts without flair. When they expect a fist, hand them a statute. When they expect you alone, show up with 10 neighbors and a notary. And when fear whispers that your house is a hostage, remember, silence is their weapon. Process is yours. We weren't lighting a fire. We were turning on a switch. By the end of the week, our boardroom looked different. Not quieter, truer. Rebecca had 3 sources on the record. Sam had a draft suit with 6 counts and a stack of exhibits tall enough to rest a coffee on. The insurance carrier sent a reservation of rights letter that read like thunder. And Karen? For the first time, she skipped an open meeting. She sent Chad instead, who read a statement about regrettable misunderstandings and ongoing corrections. I didn't clap. I checked the clock. Phase 4 had started itself. When rot finally meets daylight, it doesn't explode. It just stops pretending. Karen's empire began to crack the moment sunlight hit her lies. The state investigator arrived unannounced at the Pine Creek HOA office, clipboard in hand, badge visible, and within an hour, residents were peering through windows as boxes of documents were carried out to unmarked cars. The gossip spread faster than wildfire. State audit, embezzlement, criminal charges. But for Sarah and me, this was not gossip. It was justice catching up. I had seen enemy strongholds crumble overseas, but there was something uniquely satisfying about watching a domestic tyrant lose her footing on her own polished marble floor. If you've ever dealt with someone who thought power made them untouchable, drop a comment, because this is where they learn what accountability feels like. The following week, the HOA office sat dark. The closed for maintenance sign fooled no one. Inside, Karen's carefully orchestrated system of intimidation collapsed into chaos. The bookkeeper resigned, 2 board members lawyered up, and Doug vanished from public view entirely. Chad still strutted around the neighborhood, though his confidence had turned brittle. I caught him one afternoon loitering near our fence, his phone camera pointed toward our house. "Lost something?" I asked. He muttered something about routine inspection, but his eyes flicked nervously toward the sheriff's cruiser parked a few houses down. The county now had jurisdiction over any further enforcement action, stripping the HOA of its pseudo-police powers. For the first time in months, Pine Creek felt like it belonged to its residents again. I didn't stop there. With Sam's help, we filed a motion demanding a forensic audit of HOA accounts and an injunction freezing all remaining assets pending investigation. The motion was granted, and suddenly Karen's emergency fund and Doug's consulting reimbursements were locked tighter than Fort Knox. Investigators traced the money trail to 2 shell companies, both registered to Karen's sister and Doug's son. Over $70,000 of homeowners' fees had been siphoned for landscape design, security consulting, and community engagement. In truth, it funded private club memberships, luxury spa weekends, and campaign donations to county officials who had looked the other way. The DA called it patterned financial misconduct. I called it theft. The next HOA meeting, held under temporary state supervision, was the largest in Pine Creek history. Residents packed the clubhouse, some standing outside with phones recording through the windows. Karen sat rigid, flanked by her attorney. When the moderator announced that the association was under criminal investigation, a murmur swept the crowd like wind through tall grass. Then I stood. "This isn't just about money," I said, voice steady but loud enough to carry. "This is about power, how it's abused when good people stay silent." I displayed printed financial statements showing the fraudulent transfers and the recorded transcript from Karen and Doug's private meeting. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's face turned pale. Doug's hand trembled. When the moderator read the motion to remove both from the board, the vote was unanimous. For the first time in Pine Creek's history, the bullies had been dethroned. That night, Sarah and I sat on the porch with the same quiet we had once dreamed of. Fireflies blinked in the yard, the air smelled like rain, and for the first time, I saw her shoulders relax fully. "Do you think they'll actually go to jail?" she asked softly. I nodded. "If not, their reputations are gone." "That's worse for people like them." A week later, the county DA filed multiple charges: embezzlement, falsification of public records, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Chad offered a plea deal, flipped immediately. His sworn statement confirmed everything from forged invoices to coordinated harassment campaigns. Doug turned himself in 2 days later. Karen held out longer, but when investigators found the secondary account under her name with HOA funds, the last of her defenders fell silent. The media descended on Pine Creek like vultures. Local news aired footage of Karen in handcuffs, her immaculate composure replaced by the vacant stare of someone realizing the cameras were now pointed at her, not for her. Residents, once afraid to speak, began telling their stories on record: years of fines, threats, and humiliation. The HOA became a national talking point, an example of suburban tyranny undone by one couple's refusal to bow. The same reporters who once ignored my calls now wanted exclusives. But we didn't want fame. We wanted reform. I used the spotlight to advocate for a statewide HOA accountability bill requiring transparent audits and resident oversight committees. It passed within 6 months. Power, when returned to the people it was stolen from, spreads fast. As the legal dust settled, Sarah and I focused on rebuilding what mattered. We founded the Pine Creek Veterans and Families Alliance, a nonprofit that provides legal and emotional support for homeowners facing HOA harassment. Rebecca joined as communications director, and Mike oversaw security because, as we joked, once you've survived Karen Matthews, you can handle anything. Chad, after serving a short sentence, sent Sarah a handwritten letter of apology from rehab. She read it once, sighed, and said, "Maybe he's learning." That was her strength, seeing redemption where I saw tactics. By spring, Pine Creek had changed completely. The new HOA board was resident-led, with monthly open meetings live-streamed for transparency. Fines were now capped, appeals handled by a third-party mediator, and the budget published online. The fear that had once hung over driveways and lawns was gone, replaced by casual waves, community cookouts, and genuine pride of ownership. One evening, as I locked the garage, a teenage boy, one of the kids from my self-defense classes, rode by and called, "Hey, Mr. Morrison, you're the guy who took down the HOA, right?" I laughed. "I'm just the guy who held the line," I said. But inside, I felt something I hadn't felt since retirement: purpose. When Karen's sentencing hearing arrived, the courtroom was packed. Sarah sat beside me, her arm finally healed, though the scar on her shoulder caught the light like a badge. The judge read the verdict guilty on all major counts and sentenced her to 5 years. Doug got 3. The restitution order required them to repay every dollar stolen, plus damages to affected homeowners. As Karen was led away, she glanced back once. I met her gaze without triumph or anger, just finality. Some battles aren't won by breaking enemies, but by rebuilding what they tried to destroy. 6 months later, I stood at the community center podium as Pine Creek dedicated its new public garden funded by the recovered HOA money. The trellis I rebuilt for Sarah stood at the center, covered in blooming roses. "This place used to symbolize control," I said to the crowd. "Now it stands for accountability." The applause wasn't loud. It was steady, honest, and it meant everything. If you're watching this, remember, power only works if you give it permission. Whether it's an HOA, a corrupt boss, or any self-proclaimed ruler of small kingdoms, they all crumble when someone stands their ground. We didn't need revenge, we needed truth. And truth, once uncovered, spreads faster than fear. So, to everyone facing their own Karen or Chad right now, document everything, stay calm, and never underestimate what one determined voice can ignite. Because when justice finally hits, it doesn't knock. It kicks the door down. The certified letter from the HOA's attorney threatened a property lien for unpaid fines totaling $14,750, an absurd amount based on violations we had not even been notified about. Sarah's face paled as she read it. "Jack, they could actually take our home." I examined the letter carefully. They are trying to force us to either pay or spend even more fighting it in court. It is a desperation move. Sam confirmed my assessment. This is legally questionable at best, but fighting it would be expensive. They are betting you will back down rather than face a protracted legal battle. I smiled slightly. They still do not understand who they are dealing with. In the SEALs, we had a saying, "The only easy day was yesterday." I have never backed down from a necessary fight. Our counterattack was multi-pronged. Sam submitted a comprehensive audit request to the court. Rebecca published her first article on the HOA's questionable practices, and we received another anonymous tip with detailed information about offshore accounts where HOA funds had been transferred. The pressure increased when Chad appeared at Sarah's hospital to deliver a thinly veiled threat. The board wanted me to remind you that accidents happen. It would be terrible if something happened to your house while you were at work. Sarah, showing remarkable composure, responded, "That sounds remarkably like a threat, Mr. Wilson. As a mandatory reporter, I am obligated to inform hospital security and the police. Would you like to clarify your statement before I make that call?" Chad retreated quickly, clearly unprepared for her response. We hosted an informal community meeting where nearly 30 residents shared their HOA harassment stories. An elderly woman had been fined $500 for having a religious symbol on her door. A young father was penalized because his daughter's adaptive swing set for her disability did not meet height restrictions. By the meeting's end, we had formed a homeowners' rights committee and collected enough signatures to force a special election for new HOA board members, a process Karen had avoided for years through procedural manipulation. When Karen's attorney claimed most signatures were invalid and suggested that only homeowners without outstanding violations could participate in elections, it only strengthened our resolve. Meanwhile, we learned that Officer Benson had agreed to help Karen and Doug solve their problem permanently by planting drugs in my vehicle. Surprisingly, Chad warned us of the plot. "Look, I do not like you, but this has gone too far. They are planning to set you up. Benson is going to plant something in your truck tomorrow and then receive an anonymous tip about drug activity." When I asked why he was telling me this, Chad looked uncomfortable. "Your wife treated me like a human being when she had every reason not to, and I have seen the financial records. Karen and Doug have been stealing from all of us for years." Instead of avoiding the trap, I decided to use it. With Sam's guidance and Mike's help, we installed additional hidden cameras in and around my truck, then waited. Around 2 in the morning, our cameras captured Officer Benson planting a small package under the driver's seat. 3 hours later, he returned in uniform, citing an anonymous tip about drugs in my vehicle. The trap was set, and Benson was about to learn the consequences of underestimating a retired SEAL. When Benson approached with his anonymous tip, I played along with just enough confusion and outrage to seem authentic. "I have nothing to hide," I said, providing consent to search. Benson triumphantly retrieved the package he had planted earlier. Well, what do we have here? Looks like someone has been involved in some illegal activities." I maintained calm as he opened the package, his smirk faltering when he discovered it contained baking sugar, not illicit substances. "I do not understand," he muttered. "There must be some mistake." That is when I played my trump card. "No mistake, Officer Benson, just a different substance than you planted at 217 this morning. I have replaced the contents, and I have high-definition video of you approaching my vehicle and placing that package. Copies have been forwarded to my attorney, the police chief, and the district attorney's office." The color drained from Benson's face. The other officer, clearly not involved in the conspiracy, looked confused. "What is he talking about, Ben?" Benson stood frozen, holding evidence of his own crime. "In the SEALs," I said conversationally, "we learned to anticipate enemy actions and prepare countermeasures. You are currently holding evidence of attempted framing of a civilian, abuse of police authority, and criminal conspiracy." The police chief arrived, Benson was taken into custody, and formal statements were collected. By afternoon, word had spread throughout Pine Creek. The corrupt officer working with the HOA had been caught red-handed. Karen and Doug panicked, calling an emergency board meeting at Karen's home, their third violation of open meeting requirements in a month. This time, we were fully prepared. Sam had obtained a court order requiring all HOA meetings to be properly noticed and open to all residents based on the pattern of prior violations. When Karen attempted to hold the meeting behind closed doors anyway, a process server delivered the court order along with a notice that continuing would constitute contempt of court. Neighbors who had previously been too intimidated to speak up gathered outside Karen's house with signs demanding financial accountability. Local news crews captured the scene. Angry residents, a flustered Karen shouting at the process server, and Doug attempting to flee through a back entrance, only to find Mike Johnson calmly waiting, recording everything on his phone. "Going somewhere, Doug?" Mike asked pleasantly. "The meeting has not even started yet." The recording we had obtained from the previous closed-door meeting proved devastating when Sam played it for the district attorney. Karen and Doug explicitly discussed using HOA funds for personal expenses, targeting specific homeowners for harassment, and their plan to plant evidence with Benson's help. "This goes beyond civil violations," the assistant district attorney told Sam. "We are looking at criminal conspiracy, embezzlement, extortion, and abuse of power. We will need formal statements from affected residents." Within 48 hours, search warrants were executed for Karen's home, Doug's residence, and the HOA office. The financial records they seized confirmed our worst suspicions. Over $250,000 in association funds had been diverted to personal expenses, fake consulting companies, and offshore accounts. Karen had funded luxury vacations, cosmetic procedures, and even her son's college tuition with HOA money. Doug had covered investment losses and a gambling habit. The board members who had supported them had received kickbacks in the form of waived HOA fees and personal services paid from association funds. The arrests came on a Wednesday morning. I deliberately positioned myself where I could watch as Karen was escorted from her home in handcuffs, her carefully maintained facade of superiority crumbling as neighbors witnessed her downfall. At the police station, according to Mike's source, Karen demanded to know why she was being treated like a common criminal. The booking officer replied with a hint of satisfaction. "Do you know who you have been harassing, Mrs. Matthews? That man you have been threatening is a decorated Navy SEAL with 25 years of service. You are lucky all he did was expose your crimes instead of using his particular set of skills." Karen's face reportedly went pale as the realization sank in. "Morrison is a SEAL?" The officer nodded. "Team 6, Bronze Star with Valor. And you pushed his wife down a flight of stairs?" Rebecca's front-page story ran the next day. Hundreds of thousands stolen, residents systematically harassed. She detailed the financial crimes, the pattern of selective enforcement, and the attempt to frame me with planted evidence. Other news outlets picked up the story, focusing on the dramatic elements: a retired SEAL systematically dismantling corruption in his community, officials abusing power against the very veterans who had served the country. The coverage sparked similar investigations in other communities, with state regulators promising increased oversight of homeowners associations statewide. At the emergency community meeting held in the Pine Creek Clubhouse, over 100 residents attended, more than had participated in HOA activities in years. I presented a complete accounting of what we discovered, including the financial losses that had resulted in deferred maintenance and unnecessary fee increases. Many residents were seeing for the first time how they had been manipulated and exploited by people they had trusted to look after community interests. They counted on our apathy and fear, I explained. They knew most people would rather pay unfair fines than fight a system that seemed too powerful to challenge. When I finished, the applause was thunderous, not for me specifically, but for the restoration of fairness and transparency. The interim HOA board elected that night immediately established new policies requiring financial transparency, fair enforcement procedures, and proper notification of all meetings and decisions. They reduced association fees by 30% while actually increasing services, simply by eliminating the systematic theft that had drained resources for years. Thomas Murray, a city council member who had previously supported Karen, publicly apologized for his failure to investigate residents' complaints. This situation has taught me a valuable lesson about listening to constituents and questioning those in positions of authority, he said during a council meeting. I am proposing new city regulations to ensure proper oversight of all homeowners associations within our jurisdiction. Chad Wilson faced lesser charges after cooperating with prosecutors. At his sentencing hearing, he made a statement that surprised everyone. I want to apologize particularly to Sarah Morrison. When you treated me with dignity in the hospital, despite what I had done, it forced me to question everything. I got involved with the HOA because it gave me a sense of power I was missing elsewhere in my life. I have learned that real strength is not about controlling others. It is about holding yourself accountable. The judge sentenced him to probation and community service at the local Veterans Center, where Chad would later say he learned more about real courage and integrity in 1 month than in his entire previous life. Karen and Doug received no such leniency. The evidence against them was overwhelming, and neither showed genuine remorse. Karen maintained that she had simply been managing the community according to standards, while Doug claimed he was just following established financial practices. The judge was unimpressed, sentencing Karen to 4 years in state prison for embezzlement, conspiracy, and misuse of property funds. Doug received 3 years. Their assets were seized to repay the stolen HOA funds, with Karen's luxury car and vacation timeshares sold at auction to help restore the depleted community accounts. Officer Benson lost his badge, his pension, and eventually his freedom, receiving 2 years for abuse of power, conspiracy, and planting false evidence. His case sent shockwaves through the local police department, prompting an internal affairs investigation that uncovered other instances of favoritism and misconduct. The police chief, fighting to restore his department's reputation, implemented new training and accountability measures, personally apologizing to Sarah and me for the department's failure to properly investigate the assault. 6 months after the arrests, Pine Creek Estates had transformed. The community that had once operated under a cloud of fear now held regular social events, neighborhood improvement projects, and transparent governance meetings. The trellis I had built for Sarah stood as a symbol of our victory, covered in flowering vines that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds. My self-defense classes for neighborhood youth had grown to include seminars on civic engagement and community organization for adults, teaching the same principles that had helped us overcome systematic corruption. One evening, as Sarah and I sat on our front porch watching the sunset, Mike and Rebecca joined us with a bottle of wine to celebrate the 6-month anniversary of the revolution, as residents had taken to calling it. "Did you ever imagine when you moved here that you would end up leading a community uprising?" Rebecca asked, raising her glass in a toast. I smiled, watching children playing freely in front yards that had once been subject to arbitrary restrictions. In the Seals, we had a saying, "The only easy day was yesterday." But we also learned that the right team, the right strategy, and unwavering determination can overcome seemingly impossible odds. This community had everything it needed to free itself. It just needed someone to show them how to fight smart instead of surrendering to intimidation. Sarah leaned against my shoulder, her injury long healed. but the experience permanently etched in our memories. The irony is that Karen and her crew thought they were building their personal kingdom, but they actually created the conditions for a truly united community. Sometimes people need a common enemy to discover their common humanity. Mike nodded in agreement. I have lived here 15 years and never knew half my neighbors until this happened. Now we are planning block parties in community gardens. Karen would hate what she accidentally created. We all laughed at that, the sound carrying across front yards where neighbors waved and smiled, genuine connections, replacing the artificial standards that had kept everyone isolated and afraid. The last remnants of the old regime disappeared when the new board removed the ostentatious Pine Creek Estates, a premier community sign that Karen had commissioned with embezzled funds, and replaced it with a simple marker reading Pine Creek, where neighbors become friends. The former HOA enforcement office was converted into a community center, offering resources for residents, including a small library, meeting spaces, and a weekly farmers market. Chad, having completed his community service, surprised everyone by volunteering at the center. His first-hand knowledge of the previous system's abuses made him particularly effective at helping residents understand their rights and responsibilities. Sarah returned to her nursing career fully, but with a new focus on community health education. The experience with the HOA had shown her how systems designed to protect people could be weaponized against them when transparency and accountability were removed. She developed programs teaching patients to advocate for themselves in healthcare settings, applying the same principles that had helped us overcome institutional bullying. Her shoulder occasionally ached in cold weather, a physical reminder of where our journey had begun, but she considered it a small price to pay for the community we have now. As for me, the skills I had honed over 25 years as a SEAL found unexpected application in civilian life. The methodical intelligence gathering, strategic planning, and tactical patience that had served me in combat zones proved equally valuable in confronting domestic corruption. I began consulting with other communities facing similar issues, teaching residents how to document abuses, build coalitions, and use legal leverage to restore fairness and transparency. The principles are the same, whether you are facing armed insurgents or corrupt bureaucrats, I explained during a community organizing workshop. Identify the power structure, document the abuses, build alliances, and apply pressure at the weakest points. Most importantly, never let them isolate you. Isolation is how corrupt systems maintain control. 1 year after Karen's arrest, Pine Creek Estates hosted its first community-wide celebration, not the exclusive, appearance-focused gatherings of the previous regime, but an inclusive block party where children played freely, neighbors shared home-cooked food, and differences were celebrated rather than regulated into conformity. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across lawns now personalized to reflect the diverse tastes and needs of individual families, a reporter from a national magazine covering the event asked me what I considered the most important lesson from our experience. Freedom requires maintenance, I said after considering the question. Whether it is a nation or a neighborhood, the price of liberty is constant vigilance against those who would use power for personal gain rather than community benefit. In the military, I fought for American values on foreign soil. Here, I discovered those same values needed defending in my own backyard. The weapons were different, documents instead of rifles, evidence instead of explosives, but the fundamental principle was identical. Stand up for what is right, no matter the personal cost. The reporter nodded thoughtfully. And was it worth it? All the stress, the risk to your reputation, the threat to your home? I looked across the gathering where Sarah was laughing with neighbors who had once been too frightened to speak to each other. Then, at the trellis that had started our journey, now a living monument to persistence and renewal. Some fights choose you. When they do, the only question is whether you will face them with courage or bow to intimidation. For 25 years in the SEALs, I learned that the hardest battles often yield the most meaningful victories. This was not the peaceful retirement I imagined, but it gave us something more valuable, a community worth fighting for.